The biggest enemy to art is people who think yesterday was more valuable than tomorrow. So my parents are from the India side of Punjab. I originally was gonna keep my parents happy, get an MBA. I figure an MBA is the path to employability. And at the same time, I discovered spoken word poetry. And when I realized that it was a powerful tool, that just felt like the most liberating thing ever. And I wanted it. I wanted that freedom. The first song I ever put out was called Voice for the Voiceless. And it was telling stories that other people weren't able to tell for whatever reasons. And I was working with a bunch of different people in music, and one producer came up to me and said, I can get us a deal. What happened was this deal turned out to be fraudulent. It didn't exist. It took me a year of denial to figure that out. Now I was just burning money out of my bank account, living off credit cards and line of credit. Because in my head, at any moment, the check from this deal was coming, not realizing that it wasn't coming. That just kind of made me just be like, what am I going to do now? Kind of ramped up, and I said, it's humble the poet till death. So either you're gonna die in 3 months, or you're gonna do this forever. But you will die humble the poet. You will do nothing else for the rest of your life. And that's the thing people have to realize. Hip hop isn't telling somebody your story, it's helping them formulate their own story. That's what art is. Taking your pain and creating something beautiful from it.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... Humble the Poet is a spoken word artist, rapper, and author, but he wasn't always this successful and this famous. He used to be a high school teacher in Canada 10 years ago and decided to quit and go all in the music business and the performance business, and he struggled. He got ripped off. He lost all his money. He had to move back in with his parents and really try to discover who he was. He started writing, he started blogging. Those turned into a book. That turned into a commercial with Apple, and he slowly started figuring out how he had to show up every day in order to be successful. And this man, even though he's still fairly young, has so many philosophical ideas that we all can learn from, and it's gonna be great to watch his career go up and up and up. He's got his second book out. He's creating more music videos. He's touring with his spoken word, and I think we can expect great things from this young man. So sit back and be amazed and surprised with Humble the Poet. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Humble the Poet, the Canadian author, rapper, and spoken word artist. In 2010, you left your job as an elementary school teacher to pursue poetry and music full-time. And today, your videos have millions of views and you are touring the world. You've written 2 books, UNLEARN, 101 Simple Truths for a Better Life, and your latest, Things No One Else Can Teach Us, which shares raw and honest stories about how to change in mindset can radically alter one's outlook. Humble, welcome to London Real.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here, man. First wanted to kick off, what's it like coming to London? Like, what does this city remind you of? How is it different from Toronto or maybe other places you've traveled? Like, what does this city feel like?
London's intense. I think that's the best word. It's just intense. People love what they love out here. So, you know, when I first started performing out here, like in 2011, 2012, everyone that showed up knew all the lyrics and they were there. It wasn't kind of an obligation or just a passive thing they could do on a Friday night. They really cared. And you see that, you know, with all the soccer riots, and you see that with just the passion with everything that they care about. So I think that intensity really shines in a positive and a negative light. but it's an intensity nonetheless.
Okay. And how does it compare to New York City as far as a big city?
I think New York is just a wave. I think New York is you have to kind of catch the wave that's already happening, open your sails and join wherever the flow is going, whatever street you're walking on, whatever trend you're on, or whatever space that you're trying to exist. And I think it's challenging because I have to think, especially with New York as of recently, there's not a lot of brand new things being credited coming out of that city. But it's one of the biggest, most intricate bird's nests we've ever created, and just the scale of it. But I think where over here you have a little bit more critical thinking, but at the same time it's just there's an enthusiasm that I don't think I've ever witnessed anywhere else, and I think that just kind of has to do with maybe the cheeky sense of humor people have out here. I think there's a little bit of a fascination with what's happening across the pond. I think, North America still kind of sets the standard for what content can be. And I think, people embrace that with open arms. So every time I come out here, I'm embraced with open arms, and I'm treated like much more of a celebrity than I ever feel like I am. But with all the bells and whistles, because London's a world-class city.
That's nice. And while we're on cities, then how does that compare with LA, which might be a future home of yours?
Yeah, LA is, the breeding ground for all of this. LA teaches you how to make it all happen. LA, to me, is where creativity and commerce hold hands, and you find all the different options in terms of how you can make a living off your ideas. And the challenge with LA is, it's a planet in itself, and it's the place where people who didn't get enough attention at home and didn't get enough attention in their small towns or felt too big for their places, they moved to. So it's the big leagues for creativity, and people sometimes mistake the laid back West Coast vibe, and they think that it's not going to be as intense, or people aren't working as hard as they are compared to somewhere like New York. But it is just as intense, just beyond the facade, and that's part of it. The palm trees are in the great neighborhoods, and the palm trees are in the ghettos, and they exist 2 blocks away from each other. So it's as real as it gets. And coming from a hip hop space, the big thing they always said was New York is a lot of rappers acting like gangsters, but LA is a lot of gangsters trying to be rappers. And you can really see the difference, and it's very visceral in terms of how things work. And the spectrum, you got people living in tents on the streets, people living in their cars, people living in motorhomes, and people living in small apartments, all the way up to these mega mansions in the hills. And I think that spectrum allows people to think that they're always one step away from having their dream come true. And so for me, I try to look at it from an outsider's perspective and be mindful that the longer I spend there, the longer it's going to have an influence on me. So go home often. I've been doing 4 years there on and off, ensuring I go home and kind of hitting that reset button.
Detox a little bit.
Detox a little bit.
But also tap into what LA is good at, which is kind of mixing commerce and creativity and building stars and building things, right?
Yeah, because when I was in Toronto, and especially making music, the idea, every artist's idea was just get really good and then you'll get discovered. Maybe Drake will find you and he'll throw a bag of money at you, or Puff Daddy or somebody will give you a shot. And I think, it was necessary for me to go to LA to realize that, no, you have to create your own opportunities. One of the biggest lessons I learned in LA was don't be proactive when it comes to your creative career. You have to be reactive. So don't be chasing the managers, don't be chasing the agents, don't be chasing other talent. By doing that, you've already taken away your leverage and made yourself replaceable. And if anything, you focus on your craft, do it very well, and then the people that need you will find you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So do your craft well, but don't necessarily go out and try to meet everybody or bag them on your next track.
So I have a chapter about that in the book, and it happened because I developed a relationship with a big music manager, and they told me to come out to LA and for us to have a meeting, and I thought that was going to be our opportunity to solidify the relationship. And I went out there and I rented a car and got a hotel room and did everything I had to do, and got a very rude awakening that in LA meetings are flaky. Yes doesn't ever mean yes. It means maybe or most likely no. And 3 hours before the meeting's supposed to happen, I got something came up. Let's try again in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, I flew here just for the meeting, and I was very upset. And I called a friend, and Dominic. He's popular on YouTube as Dietrich, and he's like, "Why are you having meetings? Why are you networking?" He's like, "As long as you are replaceable, and that's why they can cancel meetings on you." And he goes, "Focus on your craft. Do what you do, and start doing it better than anyone else can do it, and then they won't cancel meetings on you because there won't be any other options." And that really changed my perspective, and I started approaching this like an athlete, and which is simply just get better every single day. And the better you get and the longer you stick with it, the pool of competition shrinks. You know, your first day, you're at the bottom with everybody else. And then slowly, the longer you stick with it and the longer you refine and polish your talents, you start to climb until, you know, you get to the bigger leagues where there's only a handful of you that can do what you do.
That's super good advice already. And what about Toronto? What's that vibe like? I've actually never been to Toronto.
Toronto's the greatest city in the world. It really is. To me, it's the world's biggest small town. It's figuring out its identity. You know, it's a very big city. It covers a lot of land. It's called the Six because it's a mega city now with 6 different municipalities. So much like New York, we have our boroughs and we have our different areas. And it's the most multicultural place in the world. In the context of, it's not just a place where everybody from around the world comes. It's now you have a lot of kids like me that may look like they're not from Toronto, but you know, we're all +1. I was born and raised in Canada. And you're gonna see a lot of ethnic diversity. And all the kids that you're seeing were all born in Canada. We're all children of immigrants. And not only from an ethnic perspective are we extremely diverse, from an economic perspective, we're very diverse. So when I went to high school in the neighborhood I grew up in Rexdale, which is in the northwest corner of the city, I had a friend whose parents were lawyers, and they got to choose which car they drove to school every day. And then in the same circle of friends, my buddy worked at KFC, and all the money went to the mortgage. You know, he was contributing to the household at 15. And so that economic spectrum and that diversity really had an impact on me as well. It allowed me to feel grateful for where I was. I had friends I used to study with in high school that were beating me at the math tests, but they knew at the end of high school where it was going to end because they didn't have the economic means to go to university. And that really stuck with me, in addition to just being exposed to all these different cultures. You know, my best friend growing up was from Trinidad, and the first birthday party I ever went to was the Trinidad birthday party. And now every year I go to Trinidad just because it feels like home. It feels like nostalgia. And sometimes when I'm in the States, they don't get that. You know, they use terms like cultural appropriation when they're like, well, you're a brown guy and you're rapping. That's black people's culture. Or you know, if somebody uses a different hairstyle, if we use different languages. And I think what Toronto is really the future of what a multicultural society looks like. And London is very multicultural, but London's still intense. And I think there's some divides in there. But sometimes London does give me that hint. Once I was here at a McDonald's, just using the bathroom, and a Jamaican dude walked up to me and said, "Kedan." And Kedan is slang for like, "Hey, how you doing?" You know, it's not a formal greeting. It's the type of slang you say to your homies, and in Punjabi. So you knew he grew up with a lot of Punjabis, and it's more of a integrated, we're in society type situation. And Toronto has a lot of that. So in my high school, we had about 80 different languages represented, and you know, there was only a handful of white folks at my high school. And then when I taught in the same neighborhood when I was an elementary school teacher, and I never had a white student for the 7 years that I taught. It was all new immigrants coming into the country. And it really, in Canada, really doesn't look at itself as a melting pot. It's more like a salad bowl. Everyone comes, can stay who they are, and just mix amongst everybody else. And everybody makes space for everybody. And you start to see the commonalities of people in the diaspora in terms of, you know, my mom treats me the same the way as my friend Mohammed, who's from Somalia, his mom treats him. You know, like immigrant moms are very the same. Immigrant dads are the same. And we started to see that lineage and those connections. And that made us have a lot in common. And in addition to that, Toronto being one of the only major cities in Canada gives us our own little issues. We think we're the center of the universe. I recently had a meeting in LA with somebody who was also Canadian from a small town, not a smaller town, smaller city, Edmonton. And half an hour into the meeting, she's like, "You're such a Toronto boy." And I was like, that's a stereotype I probably live up to. And it just comes from us being that one big city. And
you're like the best in Canada. And
we're like the best, yeah, we're like the only thing that matters sometimes. Right. And, you know, we got and now with the, you know, world championship basketball team with the Raptors, and, you know, us doing super well in the music space with Drake, The Weeknd, Tory Lanez, Jesse Reyes, and Shawn Mendes. We're a creative hub. Great things are happening. Google is building a little society, Sidewalk Labs out there. We have a growing tech space. And it's a place where a guy like me can get a seat at the biggest tables. And so when I think of, having to do work in LA, that's like a super small fish in a very crowded, muddy pond. And in Toronto, they gave me a shovel and they said, let's dig the pond. Let's figure it out. So
you mentioned Drake there, but you've also mentioned that Drake's the kind of guy that doesn't take all the air out of the city. He doesn't necessarily dominate and allows room for other artists. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when, especially him being the first artist to really penetrate internationally and put on for the city, he really had an opportunity to be the gatekeeper and to be like, if you want this international status and if you want to be a mainstream success, it's got to be through me. And he didn't do that. When other artists were finding their own lanes and coming up, he made space for them. Either he supported them and shared his platform with them, or he just completely just stayed out of their way. And I think what that allowed was for us to build multiple pillars. And now, in the hip hop space, for example, Atlanta is very popular, but the challenge there is like all the artists have a very similar sound and they all have a very similar lineage. But in Toronto, all the artists that are doing very well, none of them sound the same. And many of them haven't even collaborated with each other. So it's this opportunity where we have all these individual pillars holding up the city. So if tomorrow Drake decides to retire, we still have The Weeknd, who's one of the biggest R&B artists, or we still have Tory Lanez, who's another hip hop artist, who's been, he's just finished his own world tour recently. And in the pop space, we have Shawn Mendes, and we have Alessia Cara, who's singing Disney soundtracks now. And everyone has this space, and I think that way we're not just a wave. It's not a certain sound that's going to be popular for a few years and it's going to fizzle out and people are going to look for the next sound. It's going to be, the city has had so much and it's been overprepared for so long. And the moment one of ours figured out a trampoline to bounce off of, he made space for other people to do the same.
Overprepared because there was so much talent and it was just waiting to kind of pop, and then Drake showed everyone, well, wait a second, there's going to be great artists here, and there was a whole deep talent pool there.
I think there was a deep talent pool, but what Canada specifically doesn't necessarily have in comparison to the States is the entrepreneurial spirit. Everyone's working hard and trying to get hired. Everyone's not, we don't have too many Bill Gates and too many Steve Jobs, or we usually have our top minds get headhunted and work for these top companies. And I think people didn't know how to break through. We've had artists before, we had Cardinal Official, he signed to Akon, he had a couple of hits. We had Kanon, who, from my neighborhood, Rexdale, who ended up singing Waving Flag, which was the World Cup anthem for that season. Maestro Fresh West, he had an international hit, Let Your Backbone Slide, in the 80s. But it was still requiring some level of mainstream American validation or what have you. And I think when Drake made it, and when Drake took it to a whole new level and became the biggest artist in the world, and he left, he had to, he moved to LA and he did that. I think what he realized very quickly was, how do I create a situation where people don't have to leave? And he started the OVO Fest. And the OVO Fest, the first year, he had Eminem, Kanye West, Jay-Z as his headlining guests. And 7 years later, his entire roster was Toronto artists. So he slowly, he built credibility with this festival. And when he performed, he would always bring these top mainstream artists as his surprise guests. And the last year, most recently, his entire lineup was Toronto artists. So you can start to see, when you zoom out, the big blueprint and what he's been trying to do. And there's been a couple other artists who have said it too. Like, we have to make sure that Toronto artists don't have to leave and go out to LA to do it. So I'm hoping I'm the last of the generations that have to do that. And we got plenty going on in the city where people can pay their bills with their creativity being from Toronto. Because we have a resilience, especially with the weather, especially with the challenges that we deal with. And we have a lot of additional assets with the multiculturalism. Our progressiveness is 15, 20 years ahead of the States. We legalized gay marriage years and years and years ago. I recently did a commercial for Apple where I was told, don't lean on multiculturalism, find something else to celebrate. And it helped me realize that, everyone's so comfortable being who they are that now they can celebrate being who they want to be. If they want to be that posh dude or that hipster or that goth dude or that skater boy, they can be whatever they want to be. And that's how they'll be seen more so than their ethnicity.
Yeah, that's powerful. Talk to me about spoken word, because about 6 years ago on this show, I had a guy in London named Sully Breaks. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he had a video that was came out called "Why I Hate School But Love Education."
On education, yeah. He's a homie. I've done some work with him.
Oh, cool, man. He was on a bunch of times early. He's interviewed me on the show. I just did his podcast a few weeks ago, but that was one of the first times I had heard a spoken word, maybe even in London. And Sully kept doing what he was doing, but I think a lot of people had hard to get their head around what is spoken word and is it rap? No, it's not. It's got music. And he also experimented with his own creativity and put some stuff to some beats and some didn't. When people ask you what's spoken word, how do you explain it to them? And then is that what you do, or do you do all sorts of other music as well? So how do you communicate it?
Yeah, so I think for me, spoken word is a reaction to the fact that poetry is boring. Like you
Straight up.
You know, you just you get a book of poetry and you read it and you're just like, why am I? This is so boring. I have no idea why this person is writing these fragmented sentences, or I don't know what's happening, because it can get abstract. And then you realize, poetry is like food. And if I show you a picture of a delicious pie, you might be like, yeah, it looks delicious, but you're not gonna know until you taste it. And poetry, 90% of the magic is from the poet, So hearing poetry as written, by the poet and performed the way it was meant to be performed is what spoken word and slam poetry is. It's that reaction to it. And that's where you get all the emotion, you get all the color, you get all the vibrancy, you get the little, intonations at the right spots. So I think that for me is what really drew me to spoken word poetry. I was at a concert in a small town, a college town outside of Toronto called Hamilton, and it was a hip hop concert, but the opening act was a spoken word poet. And to watch him perform, and he was completely free because he wasn't doing it on music, and he was able to pronounce the words any way he wanted. He was able to shout, scream, whisper, cry, laugh, and do all these things. You're like, wow, there's so much in these words that I would have never picked up on. And most of our exposure to poetry is what we were forced to read in high school, and whether it was Shakespeare and you don't understand half the things he's saying. So for me, spoken word was hear it from the horse's mouth and hear the magic that comes from it. And once you've heard it, then go ahead and read their book, and now you'll have some more context.
Was Henry Rollins one of the first guys that people knew? Because he used to do that early on.
He's
right?
punk as well, and he's raw. He's a rock star, and he's energy and aggressive. Exactly, and I think definitely. And I think what it also was is, for underrepresented communities, it was a place to tell your stories. I think people don't even realize, especially even in the Black community, like hip hop in New York, when it first came, like it was shunned. Like it was such a small community. It wasn't embraced as even Black culture at that time. They were listening to rhythm and blues and jazz and even rock. And what I think what hip hop and poetry, what it was is it was a reaction to also the lack of resources that you need to be a creative. If you want to start a rock band, you need resources. You need training and instruments and stuff. Or if you want to, dance to country music, you need space to square dance and do everything. And hip hop culture was, it's kind of like the soccer of music. Soccer, all you need is something that looks like a ball. Right. And just kick it around, and something that looks like a net. You don't need any expensive equipment or training, ice skates and pads or anything like that. And hip hop was like, you just need a story, you need a beat, and we all come, pre-built with one, and share your story. And, there is a close relationship between slam poetry and hip hop. And I think hip hop is a little bit more structured. And I mean, it literally, DJ Kool Herc in the 70s was throwing parties, and while the people were dancing, he just kept bringing the record back so the music wouldn't stop. And then he started chanting over the music, which became rap. So I think from that perspective, the poetry was sharing the important stories. The hip hop was the fun escape. And they didn't have a lot of room in New York to have these parties, so they developed breakdancing, which was literally 10 people standing around watching one person dance, and on a piece of cardboard, So you could see it was really a reaction to what they had around them. And
during the break beats.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so for me, it was like I started with spoken word, always knowing, I grew up as a fan of hip hop, and then my flavor of spoken word was literally rap without music. And then I got into writing spoken word with some music in the back, like just kind of for some ambience and emotion. And instantly my words would snap on to the beat. I had played percussion as a kid. I played the tabla, and I learned how to sing different religious hymns that my parents put me in those classes. So I had some musical training that my parents didn't realize was gonna prep me for this world. And then so hip hop was just a natural progression from there. But I started doing spoken word, and I was performing at the coffee shops and you know, the open mics. And for me at that point, I was working as a teacher. It was just something to do to impress girls.
Wow. There's a movie that just came out on Netflix called Dolomite. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's Eddie Murphy talking about this guy, which I had heard made references to before, but he kind of made these, I guess, kind of like, you might call them blaxploitation films back in the 70s, but it was a guy who made his career in New York City actually standing up and doing this kind of raw and raunchy spoken word stuff. And they were saying that it was kind of some of the building blocks for later rap and hip hop, and I never knew his story, but it's actually a really well-made movie, and like Wesley Snipes is in there and Eddie Murphy and Chris Rock, and it's just fascinating to realize that, you know, hip hop, like you said, it just started off with a break beat and some guy being an MC, and then it turned into more, and then they learned how to loop those beats, and then the breakdancing came out of it, and I'm a big fan of that. I've had a couple B-boys on here, and then all that culture developed
DJing
around
and the graffiti and, you know, just tenets of hip hop. And you think about it, like, you know, these were underrepresented communities and underserved communities. And, you know, as a school teacher, I can tell you, you know, the only times the kids are fighting is when they don't have the words. You know, they get frustrated and they need to get something out, and then they'll throw a fist. And, you know, these guys lived in challenging neighborhoods, and if there was somebody there that could articulate their struggle, you know, and that's the thing people have to realize, you know, hip hop isn't telling somebody your story, it's helping them formulate their own story, you know. And
that's why I liked Ice-T.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why when he looked out and saw all the white boys in the crowd, at first didn't make sense to him, but that's what they were. They were articulating the anger.
He was telling them their story.
Right.
Yeah.
It happens for anybody.
Exactly. And he's put in, and that was his gift, and he was helping them put their ideas in words. And I think that's nothing new. That's been happening since the beginning of time. And, you know, being able to do that, I think it became almost kind of like a valve venting release for communities. You know, that's what art is. I think art, you know, art is taking your pain and creating something beautiful from it.
And when people can express or feel like someone else can express their feelings, you're saying that leads to just more harmony?
It leads to more harmony, but it also, I think, it'll create an exponential growth in storytelling as well. So it's you know, walking through your office, you know, see a picture of Muhammad Ali, you know, it's you hear his story and you see your story in you, or you gain the boldness to share your story from watching him do that, or, you know, watching him reject a gold medal, you know, for a greater good. That might be for you walking away from a paycheck for a greater good. And it's you know, we learn from each other. You know, we're tribal animals. We're you know, we exist in relation to each other. So I think, you know, when it came to certain communities that didn't have the education and all the art required certain resources and education to create, you know, hip hop was a saving grace for that, especially for all, you know, the vast majority of people are underrepresented and not living in the best conditions. So for me, and you know, the first song I ever put out was called Voice for the Voiceless, and it was telling stories that other people weren't able to tell for whatever reasons. And I always viewed it that way. I viewed it kind of as a responsibility, where it's like, I know how to put words together. I'm also working with young kids, so I know how to package information in a way that's digestible. You know, let me tell stories that other people aren't able to tell. And you very, very, very quickly realize that we're all in the same boat. Like, we're all dealing with the exact same things. It's all our anxieties towards the future. It's all our regrets towards the past. It's all the fact that we're not spending enough time in the present. And, you know, that story gets told in a million different ways. And if you're able to articulate that, and sometimes it's got to be the fun stuff. I always think about Black Eyed Peas, you know, tonight's gonna be a good night. They're not telling you about their night. They're giving you your anthem for your what you need to be listening to while you're pre-drinking with your friends or getting ready in front of the mirror. You know, that's what they're giving you. Or when Jay-Z and Rihanna are like, we gonna run this town tonight. Again, they're not bragging to you. They're giving you an anthem. They're giving you something to sing along and be a part of. Right. And it's the same reason we go to sporting events. We want to be a part of something bigger than us. And these anthems and these songs allow that when we go to concerts, when we sing them in the car. that we're a part of something that everybody's connected to. And I think, you know, whether it's the national anthem, it's the same thing. And there's something to be said about using our voices. You know, I think that's a direct line to our heart. And I think that's why so few people are hesitant to do that. So if you just, you know, if I start off the poem and that gets somebody else to start off their own poem, then, you know, we're in a good space.
Yeah, there's like these weird spiritual practices that we've put on the shelf because, you know, religion has its all connotations, but we used to gather and sing together, right? We used to do all of these things that we don't do anymore. And then it comes out in football anthems because we have a need to do it, right, and connect. I never thought about that going through the heart. I want to hear your story about like quitting being a school teacher, but you mentioned your parents first. Tell me about being first generation. What's it like? You know, where were your parents from? What are their thoughts? You said that your parents are kind of similar to the Somali parents. What does it set you up for in your life? Yeah. And how does that make Toronto different too?
Yeah, so my parents are both from Punjab, which is a northern state in India, but also a state in Pakistan. So when India and Pakistan broke up, the bigger chunk of Punjab ended up going to Pakistan. Actually, when India and Pakistan broke up, that was the largest human migration in human history.
That's crazy.
25 million people, and you know, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of challenges that went with that. So my parents are from the India side of Punjab, but they have some roots that would have gone everywhere. So the tattoo on my neck is the original Punjab before it broke up. And Punj means 5, Ab means river. So to be from Punjab is to be from the area of the 5 rivers. My mom came to Canada in the 70s. She got sponsored over by her brother, who had, I guess, found some work in Canada, and he started bringing his family over. And then she was told she was going to marry my dad. That's kind of how it worked, you know, arranged marriages. And that's what got him into the country. And my dad went to university in India. He went to Jaipur University. He had a master's degree in economics, but never had an opportunity to use it in Canada. Worked odd factory jobs until he got his taxi license, and he drove a cab until retirement. And always stressed education on me. And with the limited tools that both of them had, you know, their goals were simple: make money, bring more family over, and set your kids up for a quote-unquote better life. And for them, better life just meant more money, and hopefully something that had some safety and security. So the joke is with all immigrant kids is all your parents want you to be is a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And that's one job. And you know, the doctor,
Sully
lawyer,
Bragg says the same thing. His parents are from Ghana, and like
it's
that's
the
what
same,
they want.
Yeah, they just want you to be, and that exactly. That's why we connected. It's just
That's
the
why
immigrant narrative is come here. You know, we'll scrub the toilets, we'll work at the gas stations, we'll drive the cabs, so you can be the doctor, lawyer, engineer, and then everything will be fine after.
Happily ever after.
Happily ever after. Right. And I don't hold it against them within their limited scope of thinking that that's the best thing. You know, I'm the first entrepreneur in my family. We never had that. And I think for me, I followed the narrative. You know, my dad's just like, stay in school and I'll always take care of you. That's all you need to do. And you know, I have 2 older sisters, and they stuck to the script much better than I did. And you know, they did really well academically. And thankfully, we did well academically just because we had the learning styles. We're auditory and visual learners. So when the teacher is just writing on the board and lecturing the class, we were able to learn. Most kids that struggle in school are kinesthetic. They need to use their hands. They need to play with the Cheerios to do their math or figure things out that way. And that's not always set up in school. So we were fortunate that this is the type of learners that we were. So I was a straight A student without doing any homework or getting any help from my parents. But I had warm food waiting for me every day when I got home. And I had 2 parents, and I had a strict bedtime, which is literally all you need as a child to, you know, a little bit of structure. And my sisters went to University of Toronto, and then they both got into commerce. And now they both are, I don't know what they do, like supply chain. They have corporate jobs. Okay. And I didn't go to U of T. I went to York, which is a little bit more of a party school. And I was already kind of deviating from the script. And I originally was going to, you know, to keep my parents happy, get an MBA, because I figure an MBA is the path to employability. And, you know, a family friend had got an MBA and got a really cool job at Ford. So I was like, why don't I just do that too? And it was my sister, she recommended. She's like, you know, I've worked with a lot of kids, and I've grown up in a lot of youth camps. And she's like, why don't you explore being a teacher? I think you'd have a lot more fun. And they're like, that sounds way more fun than, you know, an MBA. Because I was doing my degree in IT. So it's a lot of math heavy coding, and, you know, it wasn't the most fun, but I was doing well at it. And yeah, I applied for teachers college and faked a lot of hours in the classroom and got fake reference letters and just applied and got in. Probably benefited from a little bit of reverse racism.
Okay.
And I was a diversity entry probably. And I went to teachers college and it was cool. My parents weren't happy. My dad was like, "You're gonna tie shoelaces and wipe kids' noses for a living." He wasn't happy that I didn't go to U of T either.
Right.
But again, it's within their scope, you know. They don't.
At least you're a professional, but you're not the highest of the professionals.
Yeah, I'm a low.
The pay is less.
The pay is less, and it's a little bit more labor than they wanted me to do. They wanted me to be just a straight neck up white collar exec with a cubicle or something. I don't know what they wanted, but the pay is definitely less. But they looked at it like, well, it's a government job. Government jobs are pretty secure. And then, you know, once you get into it, you realize, oh, this isn't just inspiring kids and lighting a fire in them. It's, you know, it's got, with any job, it's got its politics. There's got a lot of BS before work, a lot of BS after work. You know, a lot of things stacked up against you, a lot of government funding cuts. You know, new politicians come in and make your life more difficult, and the expectations increase. The PR battle between, you know, when teachers go on strike and what the government's able to do and be like, they're spoiled, they're already overpaid, and, you know, you end up becoming these full-time babysitters and an integral part of the economy, because if teachers go on strike, where are parents going to put their kids for parents to go to work? And you realize the amount of pressure and what comes with that. So it lost its fun very quickly. And at the same time, I discovered spoken word poetry and just viewed it as something fun to do. Again, excuse to meet girls and perform after work, go, you know, ways to spend my weekend. And it took a life of its own. I think when I realized that it was a powerful tool to share stories that weren't being shared. I think up until then, everybody complained about representation. You know, we don't see enough people that look like us on TV. We don't, you know, hear these voices. We don't hear these stories. Why is everything based around white folks? And I think for me, this is the first time I was empowered to not complain and just do something and be a voice and share a story. And I would share the most interesting things that I discovered. You know, when I learned about the relationships between Somali pirates and the toxic waste that came up ashore, that came from the tsunami that happened in Indonesia, you know, and realizing, and I'm like, this is a story that needs to be told. So I wrote a song about it. Or, you know, if I took a deep dive in the Israel-Palestine conflict and be like, whoa, this is not black and white, let's write a song about it. Or if I learned about Punjabi truck drivers in my community going down south, having unprotected sex with sex workers and infecting their unborn children with HIV. So these kids are doomed before they're born. I'm like, this needs to be talked about. And I really looked at it from that lens. And at the same time, I had a job, so I was like, I'm good. And every struggling artist I knew, and full-time artist I knew, which was a struggling artist, I was like, I don't want that life. You know, I didn't have grit back then. I didn't have a work ethic. I just wanted, no, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. Maybe my last year at university, when I knew it meant getting into teachers college, I was able to turn it up a little bit because I had a why. But before that, I was just cutting corners. I was smart enough not to work hard. And this was something that was exciting me to do. So I'd work hard at it, but I was working hard at it still with an ego. Like, I'm not a sellout. I don't need no money for this. You know, I can fund it myself. And all these artists, I'm watching them struggle, and I don't want to live like them, so I'm good.
That's an ego, not principles.
That's ego. Definitely ego.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's you know, very often, what I realized is when I needed to get paid, you know, it was making a choice between you feed your wallet or you feed your ego. And the ego is insatiable, you know, in many ways. And what I realized as an artist was, you know, to say you're not a sellout is just, you know, trying to appease some invisible audience of people who haven't even noticed you yet, let alone are judging you. And also just running away from challenges, seeing these full-time artists and being like, ooh, I don't want to live like them. This seems hard. Not realizing that the universe was going to make it all happen that way anyways.
Right.
I spent a summer in the Bay living and working with a full-time rapper. And again, I was faking it. I had a salary coming in, so I was okay financially, but I was sleeping on his floor because he was roughing it. And even he came from a well-to-do family, and he had kind of rejected their support to rough it. So we're these two boys just full roughing it, knowing at any moment if we need to, I can pull out some money from the ATM and get a hotel if I needed to.
So you're laughing at yourself to a certain extent.
Kind of. At that point, I thought I was roughing it, but I really wasn't. I was just testing my limits. But he was working really hard, and he was paying his rent through his music. And every day he'd wake up and just, rap outside the BART station, or he'd go to a concert and negotiate with the promoter and be like, hey, let me be the opener to your opener. Just give me $50. Something small, and always made him a deal they couldn't refuse, and the money would add up, and then he'd make enough money to pay his rent, which was $200 a month because he just rented a room, and then after that, just made more money to party. And I was like, wow, like what a life. This is super cool, and the freedom of it. He woke up every day and decided his day, and for somebody who was plugged into the 9 to 5, that just felt like the most liberating thing ever, and I wanted it. I wanted that freedom. And the summer came and went, and September hit, and I couldn't get back into the mojo. Normally, your summers reset you, re-energize you. You're excited for September. It's the first day of school, just like with the kids. And I couldn't get back into it. And I was working with a bunch of different people in music, and one producer came up to me and said, "I can get us a deal. We can write some music for some of these new artists, and it'll pay like 120 grand. That's more money than you make in 2 years." And I was living at home at this point, so I was very irresponsible with my money. I was investing in penny stocks. 2008 came, wiped that all away. I was buying things I didn't need, but it didn't matter because I was living at home. And in our culture, you don't leave home; you just get married and take over the house. So I was living in a mortgage-free household, and just literally my entire salary was allocated to paying off debt and buying things I didn't need. And the debt got unmanageable, and I was like, I need something. I need one miracle swoop to get rid of it. And this record deal sounds like it's going to be the thing. So I did what any, quote unquote responsible adult would do. I quit my job and I jumped headfirst into this record deal situation.
You're like mid-20s.
Mid-20s, yeah.
Okay.
And
do you ever advise people to quit their jobs and go for something else? Because we both have experience of doing that.
Yeah, definitely, but I quit my job thinking I was making more money. And that was a promise that I kind of made myself. I was like, I'm never going to leave my job until the art would pay me more. And I think what I probably did is I put that out into the universe, but I also probably said that around these people. And what happened was this deal turned out to be fraudulent. It didn't exist. It took me a year of denial to figure that out. So what ended up happening was, and I had moved out and lived, I was living on my own at that point in a condo that I originally had as an investment property, my rainy day investment property. And I moved in, kicked out the tenant, so that was no longer a source of income for me anymore. Now I was just burning money out of my bank account, living off credit cards and line of credit. Those all ran out, started borrowing money from people. Because in my head, at any moment, the check from this deal, the first half, the 50% signing bonus was coming. Not realizing that it wasn't coming. The deal was never there. This producer was trying to run some sort of Ponzi scheme. I'm not sure what he was trying to do.
Was this standard in the business?
Now that I'm in the business, no. Okay. Now, no, not at all. It's so weird. Like some of the biggest deals I've done have been based on handshakes, and it's been okay. I think. No, this was somebody I think that saw the potential in me and thought that he could accelerate things if he borrowed from this person, gave it to me, and then we would have earned some more, and then he would have paid this person with that person. And I think they just came from a place where their parents probably didn't do things above board, and they were just continuing that lineage. And I view them with compassion now. I don't hold any resentment towards them, because what they did do was they pushed me off the cliff.
Right. They got you into the biz.
They got me into the business, which I wouldn't have never done because I was too hesitant. And they pushed me off the cliff, and I had to find my wings before I hit the ground. And
they always say, if you knew what was involved in doing X, Y, Z, you would never start. If I knew what was to be involved for doing a show like this, are you kidding me? It's like 100x harder, longer than I ever thought it would be.
Exactly.
But
it's the same thing.
My naivete, thank God, pushed me into it.
And that's the thing. Yeah, exactly.
Great journey.
You gotta be a little foolish to do it. And that's when, so pretty much end of 2011, I was $80,000 in debt, no sources of income, mortgage payment due, and
music career not advanced.
I mean, the music career was advancing. Like Humble the Poet was making strides. He wasn't making pay your mortgage strides. He was making, let's take my homeboys out to dinner after the gig strides.
Okay.
Like, you know, I'd get $200 after a show or something, you know, and I get a show once a month. Like, and when I was a teacher, I didn't care. Like, it was bonus money. It literally, I'd make all my friends come with me and then I'd pay for the night. But when that became my only source of income, it was clearly not enough. And at this point, you know, this producer, I considered him a brother. I probably leaned into that too much because never having a brother of my own, and was heartbroken off of that. I just had ended a relationship as well. I was heartbroken off of that. So it was just, I felt like I was just completely in the dumps. And
how do you come back from that? And are some of those lessons in these books?
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.